What's going on, everyone? This is Kazak here, and today I just want to talk about some JRPGs that I played and share my experiences with them. Now, there's been a lot of JRPGs that came out recently, so of course I haven't been able to get to every single one, but hey, if there's one that you want to mention that I didn't talk about here, then, feel free to put it in the comments section below. With that said though, let's actually get straight into the video. So first up, we have Persona 3 Reload. Now, this was a game that I was beyond excited for because Persona 3 isn't just my favorite Persona game, but I hold it as one of my favorite JRPGs of all time. So, to see it get a full remake just made me incredibly hyped, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on the game. And having played it and finally beaten it, this is easily one of my preferred versions of Persona 3. While I know people will point out how Reload doesn't have everything like the female route and some of the features that was only available in Persona 3 Fest, the exclusions of these things didn't affect my overall enjoyment of the game. Now, don't get me wrong, I would have liked to see these things be added, but they're not deal breakers to me, especially since Reload has a good amount of features and additions that I really enjoy, such as the bonding episodes you can have with the main cast that further expands on their personalities and adds to the character development they get throughout the game. The ability to rewind time also comes in handy if you made a mistake or feel that your time could have been spent doing something better. Then of course there's also the new voice acting for the side characters that really makes them feel a lot more alive as characters, and this was a change that seemed so minor to me at first, but it was really interesting and actually kind of impressive how it made me more engaged with these characters, Even the gameplay gets some nice quality of life improvements, and traversing through the giant tower of Tartarus doesn't feel as repetitive as it was in other versions of Persona 3. Although I personally enjoyed the dungeon crawling type of level design, since I can just sit down and enjoy fighting the typical mobs and bosses while listening to a podcast or something like that. Again, maybe that's just a me thing, but it just feels so oddly satisfying to me. However though, I do think the game is a little too easy, even on harder difficulties where I was supposed to be struggling, but I still breezed my way through it all, which just feels so strange because OG Persona 3 was actually a pretty challenging game. Even with Portable, I struggled at certain points in the game, which is why I still prefer playing Persona 3 Fest a little bit more, despite the fact that the game's design is a little archaic. But, outside of that though, my experience with Persona 3 was fun, and I'm just happy to experience the game in a new, modernized way. I may also talk about the upcoming The Answer expansion when that comes out in September, so that's something to look forward to at least. Up next, we have Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. Now, I've actually kept up with the development of this game since I think around like 2017 or 18 when they were showing off very early footage of it. I also remember that this game was stuck in development hell for a pretty long time, and it just kept on getting delays after delays until finally, earlier this year, it actually dropped. I also want to point out that I am not all that familiar with the Grand Blue series since I've only got introduced to the series through like Grand Blue Versus and of course Relink. So my overall knowledge of the series as a whole is still pretty limited. However, it didn't stop me from playing these games and being incredibly curious about this particular franchise, especially when seeing just how cool and unique some of these characters are. This was honestly the biggest element of the series that got me interested. While a lot of them are based on the typical fantasy races like dragons, dwarves, and such, they still managed to express so much personality in their design, ranging from being super cool, goofy, and of course some very sexy waifus that I totally would not simp or thirst for at all by any means. Anyways, I put in a lot of hours into Relink and I enjoyed my time with the game. It basically has a gameplay formula that's similar to games like Monster Hunter or Phantasy Star Online 2. Have you ever played that game? Where you go on missions with friends and getting awards that can be used to craft stuff like weapons, accessories, and these things called sigils, which basically give characters different buffs that makes them stronger. And now here's the thing, I know some people were a little disappointed with how the game was designed like this instead of being a traditional story-based RPG. Now granted, there is a story campaign that's present, but it's extremely simplistic and it just doesn't do enough to get you introduced to the world of Grand Blue. Some characters don't have big importance in the story at all, so you're pretty much forced to read their in-game biographies to know their backstory, which is told in a very admittedly uninteresting way. So if you were going into this game believing that it's a story-focused JRPG, then unfortunately you're not really going to find that here. However, that doesn't mean the game isn't fun, because it actually is a fun game to play, especially if you have some friends to join in. There's a pretty big roster of characters that you can play as, and each of them all have different abilities, roles, and playstyles that keeps the gameplay loop refreshing throughout the game. It's really fun to just find a character that suits your style and continue to build on their attributes to make them stronger. There's also some cool boss fights that are pretty challenging and requires you to pay full attention around your surroundings. So there's definitely a good amount of things to appreciate about the game, but if you're not a fan of the quest-based gameplay loop it has, then you might not really enjoy this game that much, especially since it can get very repetitive with the constant recycling of the same quests, which to me is a little jarring since you're just going to be fighting the same bosses and enemies, with the only difference being that it's harder. However, the game is getting updates that includes new playable characters, missions, new bosses to fight against, so hopefully that is a sign that they're going to improve the game with more meaningful content to explore. So, as you can tell, Relink is definitely an acquired taste, but I still have fun playing the game, and I'm interested in seeing what it has to offer in the future. The next game we have is Disgaea 7 Vows of the Virtuous. In case you didn't know, I absolutely love the Disgaea series, and while I admit it's not a series for everyone, I love how chaotic it is. It doesn't take itself very seriously, and it's extremely self-aware of its stupid and sometimes tropey nature. This is a series that just likes to have some stupid fun, and weirdly enough, it's the thing that makes me love the franchise so much, and why I always recommend for people to play these absolutely bonker games. However, after Disgaea 6 made its rough shift to the 3D space, I wasn't sure how to feel about Disgaea 7, because while it did look pretty promising, I was curious to see if NIS would actually address some of the issues and criticisms from the previous game. Fortunately, Disgaea 7 ended up being a pretty fun game that does fix a lot of the problems I have with 6. They've added a bunch of character classes to mess around with, the stages aren't overly recycled, and have a good amount of visual variety, and every character is able to use basic skills again. It's just jam-packed with a pretty sizable amount of content to keep you playing. Even the story was surprisingly engaging, which for a series like Disgaea where the stories are extremely simplistic and silly most of the time, it was nice to see a storyline where the characters actually had a good amount of characterization and bits of development. Stuff that I wasn't really expecting here, but greatly appreciated. This game also does a good job of introducing new players into mechanics and prepares you for the post-game grind, where you basically gain access to tools to create the most broken, overpowered character of your choosing and just do absolutely absurd amount of damage. While not everything is perfect, since it still has some minor flaws, I was still very happy with Disgaea 7, and if you're looking to try the series out but don't know where to start, I would gladly recommend this game as your first entry. It teaches you the general basics and doesn't go too far to the point where it overwhelms new players with new mechanics, so please go and play the game and give it a shot. It's a really fun strategy RPG. Of course, we have Star Ocean: The Second Story Arc. Man, in my opinion, when it comes to a remake, this game is easily one of the best examples of how to do a remake of a classic JRPG right. I mean, this game is basically better than the original in nearly every single way possible. It adds so much new, but still keeps it familiar to those who played the original game, striking this great blend of modernism and nostalgia for players. The amount of effort and love put into this game is just absolutely incredible, and it basically feels like playing an entirely different game, but in a good way. While the original Star Ocean 2 was amazing, and I still love that version to this very day, I have to admit the gameplay had definitely showed its age to the point where doing a simple remaster with no changes would have been an absolute disservice to it. What they did here was something that I would have never expected them to do, because I was just assuming that if they're going to do a remake of this game, it would be more akin to like Trials of Mana or closer to what Star Ocean 6 looked like, which had me worried because Star Ocean 2 is such a beloved game that if they took that route and did it poorly, then the series' reputation would just be completely tarnished. However, they took an extremely smart route here, where they were going to remake the game but still keep all of its original identity intact, which I absolutely love so much. And because of how much quality of life improvements they made here, it's completely accessible for new players to jump in and just have a good time. The game has 2 different character stories to go through. There's a wide variety of optional characters that you can recruit, making everyone's experiences feel different. Optional side quests that gives out pretty good rewards. And then of course there's private actions where you get to interact with your party and learn more about them as characters. It's jam-packed with so much content and replay value that I could never get bored with this game. It's an absolute timeless classic, and I hope that if we get a Star Ocean 3 remake, they'll take notes from what this game did right. Honestly though, I would love to see old classics like Xenosaga, Breath of Fire 3, and older 2D Tales games get a similar treatment in a form of a HD 2D style remake, because this is just so phenomenal. And if you haven't played this game yet, I think you definitely owe it to yourself to at least try this one. Alright, last but certainly not least, we have Aeon Chronicles. Now, honestly, this game holds a lot of value to me as a Suikoden fan because I've waited years for this game to come out, and I kept up with each and every single update that it had during its development. I can pretty much go on a long tangent about it, but I'll reserve some of that for the eventual review that I'm going to do for the game. What I will say about Aeon Chronicles is that while it is flawed in some areas and it didn't completely reach all my expectations, I still loved my time with it. I enjoyed going on another journey fighting against an evil tyrant and recruiting the many different characters that I saw in my playthrough. It brought me back to the old days of when I first played Suikoden 3 and was searching for every town, trying to see if there was a cool recruitable character that showed up. Aeon Chronicles didn't hit all the marks for me, but that's perfectly okay because I knew it wasn't going to be the perfect follow-up to Suikoden 2. It doesn't change the fact that I still appreciate and enjoy this game a lot. I enjoyed exploring through the different towns, doing side quests to recruit different characters, leveling up castles to unlock new facilities, and I even love seeing characters roleplaying in the theater mode. There's still a lot here to appreciate about this game, and honestly, I'm just happy that I got to experience a Suikoden-like journey again. Speaking of which, Konami, it would be very nice of you guys to have an update on those remakes, by the way. Or sorry, remasters. Anyways, those were some of the JRPGs I played this year, and there's still a lot more to come, meaning that I got a lot of work ahead of me, but I'm sure it'll be fun. With that said, this was Kazak, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.